Holmes took the blue diamond in his hand and looked at it. "What a beautiful thing," he said. "Look at the wonderful colours in it. Dark blues and cold whites. All big jewels make people into thieves and killers in the end. This one comes from the south of China, near the Amoy River. It's only 20 years old, so it's a young thing. But already, many terrible crimes are happening because of it. I'm going to put it in my safe now, and then let's write a letter to the Countess of Morcar and say we have her beautiful blue diamond here with us." "But Holmes," I said, "I don't understand. Is that young man Horner innocent after all?" "I don't know." "And what about Henry Baker? The tall man with the hat and the goose? Is he the jewel thief, perhaps?" "No, I don't think he is. I believe he's an innocent man. I don't think he knew there was an expensive diamond in his goose, a jewel worth more than £20,000. But let's wait and see. Perhaps Mr. Baker's going to answer our advertisement this evening, and then we can learn something more about him." "All right," I said. "I can come back after work this evening. I'm very interested in the answer to this case." "Good," replied Holmes. "Dinner is at 7 o'clock. I got to Baker Street at 6:30 that evening. There was a tall man already at Sherlock Holmes's front door when I came down the street. He wore a long winter coat and had a Scottish hat on his head. When I arrived next to him, the door opened. Mrs. Hudson, Holmes's housekeeper, said, 'Good evening' to the two of us, and we went in and upstairs to Holmes's room. "Mr. Henry Baker, I believe," said Holmes to the man when he came in. "Please, sit down." Holmes looked at me and smiled. "Ah, Watson, good. You are here when we need you." Then he looked back at his other visitor. "Is that your hat, Mr. Baker?" Mr. Baker looked at the hat on the chair. "Yes, sir. That's my hat. There's no question about it." He was a big man with a big head, an intelligent face, and grey hair. I remembered Holmes's words about him. He wore a dirty old black coat, with no shirt under it, but he spoke slowly, quietly, and carefully. I looked at him and listened to him, and I thought, yes, this is an intelligent man. He was rich once, but now he has no money, and things aren't easy for him. "We found your hat and your goose some days ago," said Holmes. "But we couldn't find you very easily, Mr. Baker. We didn't know your address. Why didn't you put an advertisement in the newspaper with your address in it? We waited and waited for an advertisement from you, but saw nothing." Mr. Baker smiled. "Oh, I'm sorry. Advertisements are expensive, and I haven't got a lot of money these days. I had once, but not now," he went on. "And, well, I thought those young men in Tottenham Court Road had my hat and my goose, and I didn't want to put an expensive advertisement in the newspaper for nothing." "I understand," said Holmes. "Now, before we say more, I must tell you something about your goose, Mr. Baker. I'm sorry, but, well, we ate it yesterday, you know." "You ate it?" said our visitor, and he stood up excitedly. "Yes. Well, we didn't want it to go bad, you see. But we bought a nice new goose this morning for you. It's on the table there, by the door. Is that all right for you?"
"Oh, yes, yes," said Mr. Baker happily.
He sat down again. "And let's see. I think we have your old goose's feet, head, and everything from inside it in the kitchen. Do you want those?"
The man laughed. "No, no," he said, "but I'd like to take that nice new goose home with me. Thank you very much."
Sherlock Holmes looked at me with a little smile. "Very well," he said to Mr. Baker. "There is your hat, and there is your bird. Please take them. Oh, and before you go, can you tell me something? Where did you get your goose? I know a lot about geese, and that was a very good bird, I can tell you."
"Well, sir," said Baker.
He stood up and took his hat and the goose in his hands.
"I got that bird at the Alpha, a pub near the British Museum. This year, the owner of the pub, Mr. Windigate, began a goose club. Every week, we all put 5 or 6 pence into a money box, and at Christmas time, we all had the money for a goose." With that, he said goodbye and left. "Well," said my detective friend, "that answers one question. Mr. Baker is not our diamond thief. Are you hungry, Watson?" "Ooh, no, not very."
"Let's eat later, then. We must go to the Alpha at once. We need to speak to Mr. Windigate tonight." Chapter 4. To Mr. Breckenridge's. Holmes and I put on our coats and hats and went out into the cold winter street. The sky was dark over our heads. We walked east, and in a quarter of an hour we stood in front of the Alpha. Holmes opened the door, and we went in. In the pub, the owner, Mr. Windigate, gave us some beer. "Is this beer good?" Holmes asked him. "I ask because I know your geese are very good. Mr. Henry Baker told us all about your goose club."
"Oh, yes, but those geese weren't our geese. They came from a man with a little shop in Covent Garden. Breckenridge is his name."
"Thank you, my good man," said Holmes.
We paid for our beer and drank it. Then we walked out of the warm pub and into the cold night again.
"Now for Covent Garden," said Holmes,
and we walked down the street past the British Museum.
"Remember, Watson, it all began with a goose, but it finishes with 7 years in prison for young Mr. Horner. Perhaps we can learn more about this interesting case in Mr. Breckenridge's shop."
We walked south and soon came to Mr. Breckenridge's shop. Breckenridge and a boy were at the door. It was nearly time to close for the night.
"Good evening. It's a cold night,"
said Holmes.
"How can I help you?"
asked Breckinridge. Holmes looked at the empty shop window.
"No geese, I see,"
he said.
"There are some in that other shop, there behind you." "Ah, but I came to you because I hear your geese are very good. Breckinridge's birds are the best," he said. "Who said that?"
"The owner of the Alpha."
"Ah, yes. He had 24 of my geese 2 days before Christmas."
"They were very good birds, too. Where did you get them?"
"I'm not going to tell you,"
said Breckinridge angrily.
"Again and again people come and talk to me about those geese, and I don't like it. I paid good money for them. I took them to the Alpha, and then I forgot all about them. And then all the questions began. Where are the geese? How much do you want for them? Who did you sell them to? Why are people interested in them? I don't know. They aren't the only geese in London, you know."
"I know," said Holmes. "But who asked you all those questions before?"
"Not me. I had nothing to do with that, you know."
"But now I need your help. We ate a goose at the Alpha, and I say it was a country goose. But my good friend, Dr. Watson here, says it was a London goose. Which of us is right? It's an important question. £5 goes to the winner."
"Well then, you lose, and your friend is the winner,"
said Breckinridge.
"That goose came from London."
"I can't believe that," said Holmes.
£1 says I'm right."
"Very well," said Holmes, and he took out £1.
"I'm ready to pay, but I know you're going to lose your money."
Breckinridge laughed.
"Bring me the books, Bill,"
he said. The boy brought 2 books to him. Breckinridge opened the little one.
"This is my address book," he said. "When people sell their geese to me, their addresses go in here. Country people on the left and town people on the right. The numbers after every name are page numbers in my big book." "Read out the 3rd name on the right," said Breckinridge. "Mrs. Oakshott, 117 Brixton Road, number 249,
read Holmes. Then Breckinridge opened the big book.
"And this is my in and out book," he said. "Let's look at page 249. Here we are. Mrs. Oakshott. What can you see for December the 22nd? 24 geese from Mrs. O, read Holmes. All 24 to Mr. Windigate at the Alpha. There. What do you say now?" said Breckinridge.
Holmes put his £1 into Breckinridge's hand angrily. Street, Holmes stopped. Suddenly, he wasn't angry. He began to laugh.
"You see, Watson," he said, "Breckinridge didn't want to tell me Mrs. Oakshott's name and address at first. But later, when he saw he could easily get £1 from me, he told me everything. And he said something very interesting when he got angry. Did you hear? Other people are asking questions about those geese."
Suddenly, there was a lot of noise from Mr. Breckinridge's shop behind us. We looked back at it. Breckinridge stood, tall and angry, in front of his shop door. A weak little man stood in front of him in the street. "Look, you!" Breckinridge shouted. "I don't want to hear any more about those geese. Mrs. Oakshott can come and speak to me when she wants, but not you. You have nothing to do with it. Did I get the geese from you?"
"No, but one was my goose, I tell you,"
cried the little man.
"Then ask Mrs. Oakshott for it."
"But she told me ask Mr. Breckinridge for it."
"Well, that's nothing to do with me. I don't want to hear any more from you. Do you understand? Now go away."
Breckinridge closed his shop door angrily, and the little man ran off down the dark street.
"Perhaps we don't need to visit Mrs. Oakshott in Brixton Road after all," said Holmes to me quietly. "Let's talk to that man. Perhaps he can help us."
Holmes walked quickly up behind the little man and put a hand on his shoulder. The man stopped and looked back over his shoulder at us. His face was white.
"Who are you? What do you want?"
he asked weakly.
"Excuse me," said Holmes, "but I heard your questions to that shop owner. I think I can help you."
"Who are you? And how can you help me?"
"My name is Sherlock Holmes, and it's my job to know things other people don't know."
"But you can't know anything about this."
"Excuse me, I know everything. You want to find 24 geese. Mrs. Oakshott of Brixton Road sold them to Mr. Breckinridge here. He sold them to Mr. Windygate, the owner of the Alpha, and Mr. Windygate sold them to the people in his goose club."
"Oh, sir, this is wonderful. Oh, I'm very happy to meet you,"
said the little man excitedly.
"You are right. I am very interested in those geese. Oh, more than I can say."
"Why don't we go to a warm room in my house for a talk, then? I don't like standing here in the cold street."
Holmes put out his arm, and a cab stopped for us.
"But before we go, can you please tell us your name?"
The little man looked at Holmes and then at me before he answered.
John Robinson,"
he said.
"No, no," said Holmes quietly. "We'd like to know your real name, please."
The stranger's face changed from white to red.
"Oh, very well. My real name is James Ryder,"
he said.
"Well, well, well," said Holmes. "Assistant manager of the Cosmopolitan Hotel. Now, let's get into the cab and go home. Then I can tell you everything you want to know." So we got into the cab and went home. Ryder looked excited, but said nothing. Holmes didn't speak at all in the cab.